Okay, well, welcome officially to our final webinar of our Spring 24 series. I'm Shayna Lang, and I'm so excited to do this webinar where we're talking specifically about ways that you can work with your students with intellectual disabilities to prepare for college, even in the summer. I think a lot of times our students, for sure, get to the end of the school year and they get to the summer and they just kind of want to mentally check out, which is valid. But I think there are lots of creative ways for us as educators or family members or just community members to kind of keep on having education and career pathways at the forefront of our conversations with our students and helping them think critically about how they're preparing in a number of ways. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. As a reminder, this is our last webinar of our spring series, so I'm going to encourage you guys to sign up for our newsletter so that you can be up to date about upcoming webinars that we'll be doing potentially throughout the summer, but for sure in our fall series, we always do we reignite our webinar series and make sure to get good content out to our families. So I encourage you to sign up for that, and there'll be links included throughout here for you to do that when you get these slides, okay? I'm going to make sure to take time and pause throughout our webinar to take time and ask you questions, or allow you to ask me questions, I should say. So feel free to write those down as I'm chatting. I will pause every once in a while for you guys to ask those, and then I hope to have time at the end for us to talk more specifically about the questions that you have. And then we're also, just as a fair warning, we're going to ask you to provide a feedback survey at the end of our webinar, just so that we can continue making the most meaningful content for families and educators and getting that out to you all. And then I will be sending you all tomorrow morning a video recording along with our slides and any handouts that I reference, so that you kind of have one place to come back to and reference this information. As I mentioned, this is our last webinar of this spring semester, but we've had several webinars that have gone a little bit more in depth about some of the supports at our inclusive higher education programs. And so we encourage you, in that wrap-up email, we'll send you a link to some of those past webinars for you to go to and to find out more, because there's always more and more information to take in, and we want to make sure that you access that. So just know that'll be coming your way tomorrow at some point. And real quick, for those that don't know, in Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education, we're a nonprofit that specifically works with colleges across the state of Colorado to provide inclusive programs for students with intellectual disabilities. And we're going to talk about those programs that we support and work with here. And some of the key things that we do is education, things like this, communicating with educators and families and letting them know about these programs and helping them prepare their students, doing outreach like resource fairs and things like that, working on expansion, creating more pathways at different institutions across the state, and then tracking our outcomes, being able to tell you the meaningfulness of these programs and what students are doing after they've gone through them. This is our small but mighty team, we like to say. Tracy Murphy is our executive director, myself, and then Elise Kramer is our program coordinator as well. And we all want to be available to you if you have questions. So feel free to take down our information and reach out to us however you see fit, so that we can resource you as best as possible. So let me tell you where we're headed for today. I'm going to do a quick overview of our inclusive college programs. It seems like there's some initial awareness, which is wonderful. We have some like in 101 webinars that go really in depth into those programs, but I'm going to give you an overview of what they are, where they exist, and kind of the supports that are offered. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about what are the key college readiness skills that we tend to point students and families towards in 4 domains. We're going to talk about academics, social, independence, and career development, and talk about just some unique skills that we want students to be working on and developing as they get ready for college. And then we're going to camp out on what are some just ideas to help those skills be developed during the summer months. None of this is going to be revolutionary, or like we don't have some magic algorithm that helps students in the summer all of a sudden be college ready by the fall. But hopefully it just kind of frames your summer a little bit more strategically when you're talking with your students and just kind of interacting in your community. And then I'll share some resources for you to dig into as you need. So first, let me just jump into overview of inclusive higher education programs. This is just a picture of the timeline of inclusive college programs in the state of Colorado. So you'll notice in 2008 is when there was this national movement for programs to be developed on college campuses specifically for students with intellectual disabilities. That didn't take root in Colorado until 2016. But since 2016, we've hit the ground running, and we're really increasing our inclusive college pathways for students with intellectual disabilities here in the state. So what is a program or an inclusive higher education program? Primarily, a good wrap up of it is that it's an alternative admission pathway for students with intellectual disability, meaning students don't have to meet your traditional college entry criteria or have your traditional high school diploma. They could have, received a unique diploma or IEP or going through special education services, but still be eligible for these programs and be able to be admitted to the institution. All of these programs do serve students with intellectual disability. There's a little asterisk there because there's unique pieces to diagnoses. So we do serve students on the autism spectrum disorder. We serve students with Down syndrome and Williams syndrome and multiple disabilities. And so a lot of what these programs are going to do is look at the specific need of the student, see if they would not be able to be admitted to a college traditionally and would need additional services. The services that they do provide are still inclusive and normative. So these programs are not special education classrooms on a college campus. They're inclusive. Our students are all across campus taking classes, going to clubs, going to events, all the things that a traditional student would. They take courses that are in line with their career goal. It's really person-centered planning focus where students get to decide what they want to study for the sake of what job they want in the future. The big uniqueness to these programs is that they get access to both accommodations and modifications in their college courses. So when they select the courses that are in line with their career goal, they get to go into those courses with their neurotypical peers, but the program works to modify the content to meet their cognitive level. So instead of doing that 10-page paper that everybody else is doing in an intro to comm class, maybe they're working really hard on a 1-page paper or a graphic organizer or a presentation and slideshow to show what they've learned. So they're able to adapt those class expectations. Because of that, they're not going to be a traditional degree seeking student. Instead, they're certificate earning. They're still going to receive a transcript, still going to receive grades, still going to experience high rigor and challenge in their classes. But because they're not doing that same level of coursework as their peers, they're going to get a different outcome. And the transcripts will just note at the bottom that there is modified coursework throughout their program, but it still shows that they've learned these specific competencies and content areas and are more eligible for specific jobs. In addition to that, they also participate in career readiness and independent living support, and we'll talk a bit about that. And really what we're going to camp out on is those 4 pillars of support. So all of our inclusive higher education programs really operate off of this model, that we have 4 pillars of support to really encourage the holistic development of our students. In that academic category, like I mentioned, they get access to accommodations and modifications. They're receiving a certificate. They're experiencing high challenge and rigor, and they get access to courses across the campus catalog. They're not only limited to a select few like maybe they had in high school, but they get to choose what's interesting to them and what's in line with their career goal. On the social front of things, our programs are largely supported by peer mentors, where instead of having a para-educator go in to a college classroom with them, they're going to have a peer go into with the classroom with them to be able to support them engaging in group discussion and doing presentations and pop quizzes and all those things. So if they need support in the classroom, that comes with like a peer mentor, but those peer mentors are also really helpful in the social sphere of things. They're going to go with students to clubs, to events, to parties, to all the things that they need help to connect with their peers across campus. And peer mentors are really, really pivotal in that. In the career sphere, they're going to be going through a progression of career experiences where they're going to start with just planning and exploration and things like that. And then it's going to be an internship on campus, then off campus, then ideally paid employment by the time that they graduate from their program. So that's really a big focus. And a lot of our programs have a select staff dedicated to vocational development for their students. And then there's also independence. I think we can all agree if we've been to college, you remember the independence that you developed just in general. So those things are still true where they're just learning about self-advocacy and making choices and all of those things. But also they have a specified class within these programs that have like a direct instruction piece where they're going to directly instruct or teach students about independent living skills, money management, things like that. And then for a few of our programs that have on-campus living, they have access to additional peer mentor support in the residence halls, and sometimes additional, formal staff support as well. The big caveat here to note is that it does not ensure 24/7 oversight or care. There's not 24/7 availability of our program staff. They rely naturally on residential staff to support students that way. But by and large, there's a lot more support that wraps around our students in these programs in those 4 areas. So let me tell you which programs exist in Colorado. And I'm going to kind of give a quick overview of how they differ from one another, just in terms of their programmatic layout. And then we'll jump into some questions. So Elevate at ACC, that's Arapahoe Community College in Littleton. That is our only community college program right now. So it's a commuter campus. There's no on-campus living. And because they're a community college, their program is a little bit shorter. So it's pretty typical that a community college experience is shorter than a university. So their program is 3 years long traditionally. UCCS in Colorado Springs, theirs is the Office of Inclusive Services, excuse me. And they have on-campus living in apartments, pretty fancy apartments, if I might say so myself. They have their on-campus apartments, but they're not like your traditional dorm experience. But they room with peers from their program within the first 2 years. And then if they develop skills and they are sufficient and more independent, they're able to live with peers that are not within their program and have a little bit more autonomy on campus. They've even had students eventually move out to live independently in the community while they complete their degree at UCCS. So they've seen really great support and just progression of skills in that program. And they're a 4-year traditional program. UNC Goal, Go On and Learn. This is in Greeley, Colorado. They also have on-campus living, but that is more your traditional dorm life. So a little bit more rugged. They still have a similar model where students are going to be rooming with their peers from their program for the first couple of years and then progress to be rooming with neurotypical peers if they would like to after that. And theirs is also a 4-year program. And then Global Inclusive Program is at Regis University in Denver, Colorado. Theirs is a little unique in that they have 3 different options where students can complete a certificate after 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. The first 2 years are really focused on a liberal arts type of certificate. And then the 3rd year, if they choose to go on to a 3rd year, it's a specified pathway, like a career pathway where it's a little bit more internship focused. They also have on-campus living. I believe they have 2 different formats, whether it be dorm or apartment style. So students have options there, and it's a really wonderful, inclusive campus. All of these programs listed here have CTP status, which essentially means that students that are enrolled in these programs can complete the FAFSA and apply for federal financial aid. The difference there is that any student receiving these types of certificates, because they're not degree-seeking students, they don't have access to federal loans with the FAFSA. You complete the FAFSA and you'd be awarded federal grants or work-study funds, but not those loans. So that's one thing to just note. And then all of them have the certificate that they're earning is the same type of certificate, the Comprehensive Higher Education Certificate. So it has the same model so that there's actually transferability amongst these programs. Students could start, maybe Michael, like you mentioned, your daughter could start at ACC. And then eventually, if they decide that they want to go and move on to the next phase of their college career and living independently on a campus, she could transfer over to UNC or UCCS. So that is kind of the lay of the land with our existing schools. But we've recently added a few more, and we're in the process of adding more as well. So CSU and Fort Collins will be officially launching their program this coming fall called the RAM Scholars Program. Theirs does not have on-campus living, and theirs is unique in that it's very experiential learning focused and it's agriculture trade focused. So they're really hoping to get students in that want to work in the agriculture field because they have so many jobs available in that region right after graduation where students would be really prepared to be employed in that field. So that's a unique one and really wonderful one that we're excited about. And then MSU Denver, they are launching this fall as well with the Inclusive Higher Education Solutions. Theirs is going to be more of your traditional They're open to the rest of the course catalog, choose from a variety of areas of study. Because it is such a Denver-centered location and pretty chaotic in terms of housing, they are not going to have on-campus living for these students. That's going to be a commuter campus as well. And they're probably going to pursue more of that 4-year type of programming. And then the following year, which might be where you guys are at, depending on how old your students are, we are expanding to more of a rural institution, and that actually will be announced in the next month or so. So we're excited about that. And then an additional community college, so that we're increasing our financial accessibility for students, but also our regional accessibility. So as I mentioned, we started in 2016 and we've really hit the ground running because we want to see students with intellectual disabilities have the same options and choice as their neurotypical peers when they pursue college. So before I get into skill development and summer preparation, do you guys have any questions for me just about inclusive higher education programs here in Colorado in general?
I don't think I have questions yet, but I'm gonna have a lot probably after you start explaining everything.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of this can be so personalized. And so we will, when we send our follow-up email too, we are always available for routine meetings so that we can meet with you guys one-on-one and talk specifically about your needs. Kristen, did you have a question?
Well, I just unmuted. I'm driving. I'm sorry.
Hey,
But I just wanted to clarify the FAFSA. So if you're going to UNC or UCCS, because it's a certificate program, our kids are not eligible for federal funding.
Loans.
Loans.
So they are eligible for federal funding. So you would still complete the FAFSA.
Yeah, I did.
But when you receive that like financial aid package, it won't include loans.
Okay. So but I can get my own loans if necessary.
Good question. I don't know, Elise, I would assume so. Yeah, because it's
external. If we have to supplement with a little loan, I can get
private.
my own.
Yeah, so private loans are up to each, individual private institution to decide, but they're not automatically counted out the way they are from federal loans, but certainly lots of students in inclusive higher ed have received Pell Grants and work study and all kinds of other federal support.
Okay. All right. I was just curious about that because I haven't gotten anything back from FAFSA yet. Got it.
Yeah, and what we'll do, because that is a really valid question, and I know the financial piece can cause so many questions and what next? What we'll do is we'll include that in our follow-up email. We have one handout that speaks to a few other resources that students can use to pay for these programs. So that'll be on there for you to kind of click through as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, great question. Michael?
Is there anything with the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation?
There is. Thanks for asking. There is. So if students are enrolled in these programs that have CTP status, so CSU and MSU are still working on that status. It might be in play by fall, but it may not be. But for those programs that have CTP status, if a student is connected to a DVR counselor, what they need to do is in their plan with that counselor is identify their career goal and request to be able to go to higher education to help them prepare for that career goal. So they'll note that they want to go to inclusive higher education program, and DVR then will do an assessment, like a needs assessment to determine how much they would fund. They will only cover a portion of tuition and like school fees. They're not going to cover the specific program fee that exists for these programs, which is a range of between $1,500 a semester to $5,000 a semester, depending on which program you go to. But they will cover a portion of tuition and like books and things like that based on need. And then I would encourage families also to reach out to their community-centered boards or case management agencies. Because if your CCB or CMA receives mill levy funding, they might have this pocket of money that students can access for scholarships to go to inclusive higher education programs. We've seen that throughout the state as well. And then there's going to be a list on that handout of specific scholarships that are dedicated to inclusive higher education programs nationally that students can apply for. It's also really worthwhile to ask institutions or even high schools if they are offering scholarships to students going to higher ed, and see if your students would be eligible for it.
And I will include a link to a more robust, specifically financial webinar that we did in the fall. So when we send out that follow-up email in the morning, the link to that webinar will be included as well. And that way you can watch that and then kind of follow up with more specific questions that you may have.
Wonderful. Great questions, everybody. Okay. We're going to dive into more of the skill development piece. And I'm going to talk through skill development in those 4 domains and then summer preparation ideas in those 4 domains as well. So I always present whenever we're talking about skill development, whether it's with families or educators, these are some of the things that we just always have as our foundation. That when we want our students with intellectual disabilities to consider preparing for college, we want to start with the concept of presumed competence, meaning that we want to presume or assume that they are capable of reaching their goals and doing hard things, because truly college experience is going to challenge them in a lot of ways and tends to have higher expectations than their high school experiences did. But we know that they're capable. And so I think that really frames how we move forward with skill development with our students. We want them to have normative pathways or go through the same processes as any other student their age. So how many times do we ask students in middle school and high school about what they want to be when they grow up or what college they want to go to? We have those frequent conversations. We want to do that with our students with ID as well. We also want them to make the choice if they want to pursue college or not. We don't want to withhold that information from them. We've worked with several students that when we present all these program details to them, they say, actually, I have zero desire to do that. That sounds really hard and I'm not interested. And that's wonderful. If they want to self-select out, that's perfect. But we want them to know that it is a possibility if they choose to. And then any of the skills that we talk about today, whether or not they pursue college, they're transferable just to a successful adult life. They're just things that are going to help them be more independent, be able to be more easily hired and maintain jobs, things like that. And we just really value holding high expectations for our students because it really leads to positive transitions for them. This is just a favorite quote of mine from one of our graduate parents. She says, the bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives changed. And she specifically had a student that utilized assistive technology to communicate. And so she really never thought that college was going to be an option for him. And it was, and he loved it and he thrived. And now he's working in hospitality. And so she's really seen what High Expectations has done for her student. So I'm going to talk first about academics and just some of the key skills that we want students to think through as they're preparing for college. This is obviously not going to be all encompassing or exhaustive, but just some things to start to implement or talk about or strategize a little bit. The first one is just in the basic writing category. No matter what cognitive level your student is at, we really want to promote some of the simple writing strategies that are going to help them be communicative with professors, with employers, whatever it might be. So really simple like sentence structure and paragraph structure, even using like graphic organizers to kind of facilitate that awareness is really great. We also encourage students to practice note-taking. A lot of our students in special education don't really sit in a lecture style environment and don't feel a need to take notes, but something to being able to call out main ideas from a conversation or from a unit that they're learning in their class, whatever it might be, just kind of talking through how are they pulling out key ideas and writing that down or keeping track of that somehow. And then email etiquette is really huge. Our students utilize email like crazy in college. That's how all of their faculty are going to communicate with them. That's how their program staff will communicate with them. So starting early about how do I write an email, the frequency of emails that are appropriate, all of those pieces. And then some help with some basic reading comprehension. Our students in these programs are not going to have the same level of college reading that maybe we would recall of like hundreds of pages to read, but they are still going to be challenged to take that content from their classes. And so some of them utilize audiobooks just to be able to better retain information, or they utilize like the summaries in the back of a chapter in a textbook, as that's really where they focus of getting their information. So even those kinds of things where they're taking key ideas again, even if it's not a whole bunch of reading, those are beneficial skills for them to have. And then also in the academic sector, it's so important for our students to have knowledge of their learning styles. I think a lot of them will learn that as they get into college because they have more autonomy in their college coursework. They're going to be included in more courses, but it's important for them to start to understand, how do they like to learn? Do they like to listen, or do they need to write it down, or do they need to be active? What are some of their strengths and their weaknesses in their learning? That's going to help them in their college courses, but it'll also help them when they talk with their program staff about the types of supports that they need. So in that person-centered planning that they do, that really helps them to advocate for those types of things. Another skill that isn't always associated with academics, but we associate it with that, is persistence. That when there are higher expectations, more work for you to do than you're used to, and it could be overwhelming, that they learn this persistence, that even when it's hard, I keep on going, I ask for help, I continue forward, and utilize that grit. And then also some responsibility. Just knowing that some of our students from the high school sphere don't typically have homework that they take home with them. They don't do a lot of the work in the classes a lot of the times, unfortunately. And so we want them to really build up that they are responsible for their learning. It's not something that happens passively. They have to be active in it, and they have to take ownership of that. And I think that's really important. In the social sector, here are some of the things that we see as important skills for students to work through: self-awareness and self-regulation. So self-awareness meaning knowing what kind of sets you off, what makes you uncomfortable, what scenarios might be overwhelming for you. And then the additional piece there is, what are some key strategies that can just help me regulate? Do I get to remove myself from a scenario? Do I utilize a stress ball? Whatever it might be. But starting that problem solving of them learning regulation strategies now is going to be really great. Schedule management is huge, huge, huge. Our students in college, this is the first time that they're really in charge of all of the things in their life. And so knowing how they can manage their schedule is really important. Having some professional relationship awareness, this really comes into play when students learn the difference between how they talk to their peers in class, how they talk to their peer mentors that are kind of a support to them, and how they talk to their professors. So there's some layers and levels of how we communicate with those different people in our lives. And that's a great thing to start to conversate about now. Being able to communicate needs, no matter what environment you're in, no matter who you're with, how are you communicating what you need? Because we all need things in any scenario. And so just practicing that self-advocacy and communication. Conflict management is a new skill that our students typically navigate, especially for those living on a college campus when they're now living with roommates and they have to figure out how to live with people that they're not used to. Conflict arises, and that's very normal. So talking through, what are some conflict management strategies? Do you approach the person directly? Who do you go to if you need some advice? Things like that. Collaboration is also really big. Even on the academic side of things, so many more of our college courses are becoming more discussion-based and collaboratively, like group-based, doing group projects together. So learning with collaboration, what you can offer a group. What are some of the skills that you're bringing to that group? Or maybe in this setting, in the social sphere, maybe students are a part of a club on campus and they're planning an event. So what strength can you bring to that process to offer the team around you? And how can you encourage other people to be offering their strengths too? Adaptability, this is really big. Again, with students for the first time really taking over all of these pieces of their lives, they're going to start to see that things change a lot and don't always go according to plan. Maybe a faculty member cancels a class last minute, or your friend doesn't actually meet you for dinner like they said. And so just practicing, how do we adapt? How do we pivot when things don't go according to plan is really great. And then responsible risk taking. This one is always hard for our parents, which is really fair, but really encouraging students to take risks and think through the risks that they're taking. That responsibility piece is important. We don't want just flippancy of decision making, but allowing them to do something maybe that feels uncomfortable to you, maybe going to, I don't know, Chick-fil-A after school instead of coming straight home. Maybe that's a responsible risk for them to take, to figure out how much money they need to have to eat the food that they want to, things like that, where we're encouraging that risk so that they can learn and grow from those experiences. And then social media use is also something that's just important to talk through for our students to know that, when they apply to a college admission process, they're going to see access to social media, and it's important how they're presenting themselves and how they're communicating that way. So those are some of the things in the social sphere that we've seen be really valuable for our students to consider and think through before they get to college. And also, you guys will see as I go through all these lists, all of these skills are obviously going to be developed and cultivated in college. We don't expect a student to have them all before they go to college. It's just to kind of give you a bigger picture of some of the skills you can work through. In the career sphere, we talk more about awareness, not just like what kind of job do you want to have, but really understanding what a job looks like. So if you are interested in working with animals, looking at if a vet tech or maybe an office manager at a vet clinic, what does the day-to-day look like? How much are you actually interacting with animals? How much are you actually interacting with people? How much admin do you have to do? So like really diving into the jobs and having awareness of what the day-to-day would look like. And then pairing that with some self-awareness. What do they enjoy? Do I like sitting at a desk for most of my day, or do I like being active with people? And that's going to kind of dictate which career I'm more interested in. So kind of pairing those two together. Time management is also really important, that timeliness of being able to manage your schedule and get to a job on time. Open communication with supervisors and peers, that kind of loops in some of our conflict management. Problem solving, when you're given a task and you don't know what to do next, how do you take your own initiative to problem solve and think through what are the scenarios, what are the supports around you that could be helpful. It's also really important for students to start to identify their internal motivation, because if they get to a job that doesn't have all the exciting things all the time, that motivation goes down and they're not successful. So figuring out what motivates them and how to kind of keep that on the forefront of their job. And then that initiative, like I mentioned, taking initiative to complete tasks and not just waiting for tasks to be fed to us. That's something that our students, I think, naturally, this age of students struggle with. So helping them practice that now, initiative in classwork, initiative with pursuing friendships, whatever it might be, where we're talking about that initiative. Self-advocacy, again, communicating needs, and just knowing that it's okay to communicate needs. It's okay and good to know the limitations and the strengths of your disability and communicate those to those around you. And that kind of loops into just some social and emotional understanding. Similar to that social sphere, thinking of what are things that set you off, what are things that overwhelm you, and have an understanding of that so that either you are prepared if those scenarios happen, or you keep yourself from being in those scenarios as best as possible, and coping techniques that come with that so that our students can be as successful in any career that they choose. And then lastly, I use interdependence or independence kind of interchangeably. There's kind of this move to focus on interdependence, which just speaks to the fact that we are all to some level dependent on other people. I like to make the joke that I'm pretty dependent on my husband to wake me up every morning. I should at this point probably wake up to my own alarm, but I rely on that support in my life. And so that's really normal to have other people that we're relying on and utilizing. We don't have to be completely independent or autonomous all on our own, but we want to increase for our students their own autonomy and their voice and their choice in their life. So some of the ways that we have students focus on interdependence or independent skill development is learning how to navigate a campus independently without somebody with them all the time. So a lot of times our students are going from class to class with para-educators, but really helping to fade that away so that they figure out, where do I go if I get lost on campus? Like, where would I find that information about where I should land, you know? So that personal navigation is really important. Personal and campus safety. A lot of this is just awareness of the supports available to you. So with our students, we want them to be aware of campus security and police on campus. Where are they? What's their number? How do you access them if you need support? And just kind of having that spatial awareness of safety wherever you're at. And then community access and travel. A lot of our students feel so much more freedom when they're able to travel without texting mom or dad about getting a ride and waiting those 20 minutes. So learning some strategies about how to get around your immediate community can provide so much freedom to our students and really help them feel like they're taking ownership of their days and their plans and their schedules. Use of downtime is really big at the college level. Our students come from a K-12 schedule where everything is planned out for them. They only have 5 minutes of passing period or whatever it might be. Whereas at college, they might have hours between classes, and they might not even have classes at all one day. And so learning how to utilize downtime well and meaningfully is really helpful and can sometimes feel really theoretical and hard for our students to do right off the bat. So practicing that on a regular basis as a family can be beneficial. Medication management, taking over that process, being presumed competent to do so. Self-care and cleanliness is the kind of basic things I'm sure we're all aware of. Self-determination, that is really the ability to set goals and then also take the steps to get there. And then growth mindset. You'll hear me talk a bit more about that as I get into some of these recommendations throughout the summer. But really, when it comes to independence and interdependence, just knowing that one step at a time is really good. Students don't need to go from graduating their senior year to being able to live in an apartment, right? There's steps along the way, and it's okay to take our time in those to be as successful as possible. So before I get into some recommendations about how you can start to just work on these skills passively or really actively this summer, do you guys have any questions about those categories of skills or anything that stood out to you? Wonderful. Feel free to pause me if I did not wait long enough, but for the sake of time, I'll jump into our skill development ideas. And again, I'm going to go in those 4 categories. So in our academics, what is the primary driver for summer academic skill development? Obviously, we're not expecting you to have your students write papers or to submit reports to you about a documentary. Like, we need our students to have that mental breathing space from their school year, but we also don't want them to lose traction on some of the academic skills that they were gaining in school. That is really common in our special education world, that our students regress over the summer. And so we have to find this balance between allowing them to breathe, because that's a well-deserved break, but also maintaining academic practices. And I think the key here is making it fun, where it doesn't have to be so rigorous or it doesn't have to be so homework based, but it's just a little bit more natural that they're practicing some academic skills a little bit more naturally. They're sparking interests. And then the focus would be on some executive functioning skills. So I don't expect your students to be hammering down their writing proficiency or reading proficiency in the summer, but thinking through what are some things that they're interested in that will kind of motivate their academics in the future. And then what are some ways that they can practice executive functioning just to be on top of that. So the first one I'm going to recommend, again, this is not revolutionary, but to really start to figure out what calendar tracking app is best for your student. That might be Google Calendars, that might be a separate app altogether, but helping them to just kind of explore, what do they like about an app? What don't they like? Do they need alerts? Do they not like alerts? So help them identify that calendar tracking app. Electronic typically is best for students, but maybe they need a planner, and that's okay too. It doesn't have to be electronic. But then as a parent or an educator, supporting them to write down things, to record appointments, to utilize that app in the summer when it's low pressure, They're not expected to be in a classroom in 15 minutes, but they just kind of get into the groove of utilizing that. Then it becomes second nature when they actually get into the college environment and they need to put their classes into their calendar. We encourage students to attend local classes and extracurricular activities. This is really to speak to that sparking of interests. A lot of times students, even in high school, don't have access to lots of classes where they can spark different academic interests or things that they're interested in. So look at rec centers, look at events and art centers and museums, and encourage your student to go out and try these things. They may hate it, and that's okay. That's something that we learn too, of like, I'm not interested in animals anymore after going to the aquarium. Who knows? But encourage them to attend things so that they can start to open their eyes to what interests them. I would encourage families to have like a set time every week where your family collectively practices like personal calendar and communication maintenance. So maybe that's a time on Sundays before everybody goes to bed where we check our email so that we can respond efficiently to people that are emailing us, where we write down the things that are going on next week in our planner. And that just gives your student kind of this mental check base that every week I have to think about what's coming next, or I have to think about who I'm communicating with, and it just kind of builds in that practice. And then I want to encourage audiobooks. I think so many students like don't want to do any reading over the summer, which is very fair, but audiobooks could be fun. They could be novels, even if it's a podcast, getting them in the practice of listening to content and then asking them about it where they're having to restate it back to you. That's kind of a way that they're practicing that note-taking skill of finding key concepts. So listen to an audiobook as a family and talk about it, where they're going to have to recall a character's name or things like that. That can help them develop that skill. And then I'd really encourage the use of assistive technology apps. So many students in college have access to assistive technology beyond just audiobooks. There are things like text to speech, which is more of the audiobooks version, but also speech to text, where they could dictate something to a computer if typing is really tricky for them. A lot of times that's helpful for our students that just need help with getting ideas onto a document and then editing from there. So there's a link in this slide that takes you to kind of a quick article about some common assistive technology applications that are used in college for various disabilities. And then at the bottom of the article, there's a list of those applications that you can go to. So it's a little bit more content on the front end and then the actual list of apps to check out. There are things like we've used with students that are going to social events where maybe it is tracking captions so that if a student struggles with auditory processing, they can read the captions as they're communicating with somebody. So there's a lot of unique ways to utilize those things in a social way, in a fun way, but then it would benefit them when they get to the college classroom as well. All right. In the social sphere, my biggest recommendation is just to expand inclusive experiences. I think sometimes our students in special education can get so used to the special education services and programs and things from that world, which are wonderful and great. But then our students get to this inclusive college experience and their world is opened up and they're learning how to interact with neurotypical peers. And it's wonderful, but it can be overwhelming. And so we really want students to engage in inclusive settings as much as possible. And that's a great time to do it is in the summer when there's lots of free community events and things like that. And then a focus on using natural supports. You'll hear from our inclusive higher education programs use of natural supports a ton. That's essentially just looking at, in my current setting, what is the normative or natural person that I would go to for help? Well, who would anybody else go to? So like my biggest example to that is if a student gets lost on campus and they don't know which class to go to, we don't want them to call our program staff or even their peer mentors necessarily to say, where do I need to go? Can you find my schedule? We want them to go to like the check-in center or like the welcome center at the institution where anybody could go to find a classroom, where they see that that is normal for anybody and I have access to that kind of support too. So those are kind of the two main focus, I would say, of the social sphere in summer preparation. So with that, I would help your students search for, identify, and register for events and activities. The process of searching and registering and then going is really good because a lot of times in the college arena, if they want to go to an event or if they want to attend a club, they have to find the announcement online and they might have to RSVP and go. So that process is really helpful. We would encourage, if you haven't already, I love that developmental pathways, Claudia, you're repping DP. We would encourage families to be connected with their community-centered board / case management agency early on, because they offer wonderful social events. Typically, they might connect you to things in the community, but also that's just a good thing to know how community agencies are going to support your student out in the community, whether they go to college or not. Their case manager is going to be really important for that type of support. So just starting that connection, starting those conversations now. And oftentimes, getting connected with a case manager and going through your CCB can take lots of steps. And so doing that in the summer where maybe things feel a little bit slower, it feels more manageable. We encourage students to plan their own outing with friends. This is something that, again, requires multiple steps. So it incorporates problem solving, communication, self-advocacy, all of these things. But a lot of times our parents do it for us as students. And so we want to encourage students to take over this process where maybe they decide where they want to meet their friends, how are they going to communicate with their friends, how much money are they going to need to be there, and really help them facilitate that whole process so that they can be more independent in the future. And then attending a social event with a non-parental support. So sometimes that's just as simple as asking like a neighbor to go with your student to the grocery store or to go get a cup of coffee. It could be really, really simple, but I think the more that we're sending our students out into the community without mom or dad or caregiver always there, they're learning that there's natural supports all around them and that they don't have to be reliant on one. As much of a value as parents are, I think it's really good for them just to expand their awareness of those types of supports. And then really just creating a culture of choice where, I don't know, wherever you're going with your family, to ask your student, do you want to go here or here? And allow them to practice that self-advocacy and have choice in everyday decision making. That way, when they get to college and so many things are given to them as choices, it's not this overwhelming thing, but they learned that they can make those decisions, small or big, on their own. And then in our career, my focus for this is that over the summer, I don't expect students to like hit an amazing internship and knock it out of the park and obviously have their future job set in stone. But really the summer should be all about gathering information, just taking in information and learning more about the details of jobs. And then from there, exploring what excites them, exploring maybe what preferences they have so that when they get to that college zone, they feel like they have awareness of what types of jobs they're interested in or not. It gives them just a little bit more background information. So this is where I'm going to encourage families to connect with DVR as soon as they can, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. That's also something that tends to take some time to get connected with a counselor and open up a case. And you don't have to be ready to be employed to be working with DVR. DVR helps with career exploration, skill development, pre-employment transition services. There's lots of things they can do early on. So if you're not already connected to them, we encourage that process. Again, over summer when you don't feel as overwhelmed by a traditional school year, hopefully you have the capacity to do that. And there's so much importance. We have found this with our students that have graduated from our programs. Family networking is so, so important. So utilize your natural family connections to help your students coordinate a job shadow. Maybe they go for a half day to your neighbor's job just to observe. There's a link here about some strategies for students of how to have the most meaningful job shadow experience. But that tends to be a really low pressure way to learn about the day-to-day of a job. Or help connect them to some of your friends and just have informational interviews where you kind of help them think through what are some questions you might want to ask, or go grab coffee or go grab, I was going to say a beer, but your students are not old enough for a beer. Go grab coffee with this friend of mine and ask about how they got their job and what they love about it or what they don't. Those are just some kind of casual, more fun ways to learn about career options. Volunteering is a wonderful, wonderful experience. There is a need to show up. You are counted on. You have to communicate with somebody that's kind of telling you what you need to do. So searching for volunteer opportunities is great. That can kind of add to a resume of sorts for students. And then researching career options. This feels a little bit more researchy, so maybe not as fun, but these are great resources. The first one is mynextmove.org. They have just a really wonderful assessment of like, what are you interested in? What kind of things would you like in a day-to-day job? And it's a very accessible assessment. So that's one that I encourage families to use a lot. And then it kind of points students in pathways. You might like this pathway or this pathway. Obviously, it's not set in stone, but it's a really great way to dive in. And Indigo Pathway is similar, where they kind of give an overview of different career pathways and have students dive in to see more job offerings within that. And then lastly, I think a really easy thing to do over the summer is help your student create a LinkedIn profile. That's kind of like an electronic version of a resume where they have to think through how they want to present themselves to people in their field of interest. And it also helps them to see there's so many other people and information on LinkedIn that they can learn from. And that feels a little bit more social media-y. And so I think a little bit more enticing for our students. And then lastly, in our independence category, really the focus is that students would experience trial and error, and from that, learning. So we encourage any student thinking about going to college, especially at a residential program, to have overnight sleepaway experiences away from their parents. That might be with a camp where it's really like strategic and regimented and there's lots of supports, or it could be really, really simple with going to your neighbors. But just trying that over the summer could be wonderful for you to kind of problem solve. Okay, what are some skills we need to work on? How did that go? How did that not go? Excuse me. We encourage like taking vitamins as a practice for that medication management that tends to get them in a normal groove, consistency of taking something that benefits their body, and then you can kind of move up towards that actual medication. Just learning a couple of meals. Quesadillas, we hear a lot from our college students. Quesadillas go a long way in college. So practicing just a few staple meals and maybe offering for them to make that meal for your family where there's kind of some excitement and, you know, a need around it. That could be fun. Start to pass off chores to them, identify one at a time that they can take on with support as needed, but really taking on some ownership of cleanliness and self-care. And then there are travel training programs that can help students access RTD and different travel offerings in their community. And a lot of times, I feel like they have the capacity to learn those things in the summer when they don't have all the stuff going on with school as well. So that's a great link for you to check out in the Denver metro area. And then lastly, I would just offer that menu of tasks for downtime. So as I mentioned, our students have all this downtime in college and sometimes they don't know what to do with it. And we've had students that have just hunkered down in their dorm room and played video games for too many hours, right? But we want them to start to strategize. What could I do that's healthy for me, good for me? Is it going on walks? Is it calling a friend? And just thinking through what's kind of a short list that you want to have in your back pocket when you have a few hours to yourself that can be really meaningful tasks for you to do. So what I will do just to kind of wrap it all up across all of those recommendations, again, I know it's nothing revolutionary, but hopefully they are kind of sparking some ideas for you. Ultimately, we just want students to know that they can grow and they can learn. So instilling growth mindset in them as they're taking on some of those experiences, if they feel like they've failed at something, or maybe that quesadilla got real burnt, that's okay. We're learning and we can continuously learn and pivot and grow. And so the way that we communicate with them about those learning experiences is so valuable. So I just encourage just an awareness of our language, that we keep growth mindset language in play. And this kind of ties in that we want to help our students focus on skill progression, not perfection. We don't expect students to be here mastering all those skills before they get to college. Those things develop over time. So I would really encourage to focus on one skill in each of those 4 domains for the summer. Let's say my student, we're going to focus on X, Y, and Z, and ask them, maybe here are all the skills that we talked about on this webinar. Which ones do you want to work on? What's something that excites you? And then really work on fading your support over time, where you're kind of removing your prompting and you're helping them to take that initiative and that autonomy. And then you'll hear a lot of language. This kind of comes in play with that presuming of competence, but dignity of risk, allowing them the dignity to take risks, to make mistakes, and to learn from natural consequences is really wonderful. Collaborate with those community agencies because we need them. They're valuable, and sometimes it can feel so overwhelming to get connected to all of them. So in the summer, when hopefully you feel like you're breathing a little bit more, that's a great time to get connected. And then really my last final recommendation is just to have intentional conversations. Whatever you're doing with your family throughout the summer, just keep the conversation of, oh, is that interesting to you? Would you want to do something like that as a job one day? Keeping that just kind of front of mind. Or if you hear them mention something that they're excited about, ask if they would want to take a class about that, where they're thinking of college and career kind of naturally throughout their summer. And just thinking of what they're capable of and dreaming a little bit. So I have listed here all of these links to campus tours, because summer is a great time to tour campus when it's not overwhelming or hectic. I will point out that it doesn't give you like the full college experience because there's not a lot of students there. But for some of our students with autism or other disabilities, sometimes the calmer campus is great. So we encourage you to go through the traditional campus tour options just to get a sense of campus. And then you can always note on there that you're interested in their inclusive higher education program. And a lot of times they'll loop in somebody from their staff to come chat with you. But that would be my encouragement as well. So I have a bunch of resources that I'll send you guys that are linked in the rest of these slides. But do you guys have any questions for me about some of those skill implementation ideas or anything that's lingering about inclusive higher ed in general?
I have a question. Like a lot of our kids go to transition programs in between high school and college. Are you losing the academics over that year, maybe even 2 years?
Yeah, unfortunately we do. And so I try to talk with families and students and even transition educators to still keep some of those basic like reading practices, or email etiquette is a great one to implement in transition. But a lot of times it takes advocacy on the parents' end to say, hey, how can we incorporate some of these things in like your weekly routine? And sometimes they just won't focus on that. And so it kind of falls on the family to think through how are we maintaining some of that reading practice or writing practice when they're not at transition.
And my other question is, we're with developmental pathways, but if she goes to UCCS, is it still developmental pathways, or it's something in El Paso or something?
No, great question. You would still stay with like her home base, which is your guys' address, would still be with DP. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, great question. Wonderful. Well, I will hang tight if you guys have any more specific questions, but I'll just real quick run through these remaining slides just so you see the resources that are going to be included. There's this Preparing for College link on the left side. It's a handout that's a little outdated in terms of how many programs we have, but it still just kind of breaks down, I think, step by step of ways to kind of prepare and talk as a family about college. And then this checklist talks about those different skills in those 4 domains. That's just kind of helpful to have on hand, maybe share with your IEP team or those transition coordinators. And then I'm also going to include this UCCS recommendations. They have like these top 10 recommendations that they give to future students. I think that could be really valuable for our families. And then that's all kind of looped in for younger students on the left side if you guys are interested in that. And then there's tons of links. The one I want to point you to is that monthly newsletter so you guys can be up to date on any future things coming your way. Then there's national stuff. And then when we wrap up and end this call, you guys will be prompted to complete this survey. And we just ask that you would do it. It takes just a couple of minutes, hopefully, just so that we can continue improving our services. So I'll go ahead and stop my recording and stop our screen share, and I'll hang tight if anybody else has questions, okay?